Right. Welcome everybody to the Women in Robotics Speaker Series. This is the Pride edition of our brand new series on related to our mentorship program that's just launched. I'm super excited to be interviewing Dr. Vivian Chu, who is the co-founder and CTO of Diligent Robotics. Just a bit of housekeeping to start. I'm just going to make sure everybody turns off their mics and feel free to type in your questions in the chat at any time during the event, and we'll circle back to those at the end during Q&A for the last little bit of the session. My name is Hallie Siegel, and I'm currently Associate Director at the University of Toronto Robotics Institute and founding member of the Women in Robotics Network, former Managing Editor at Robohub, which is the global robotics news network behind the annual 25 Women in Robotics list, out of which this whole Women in Robotics network emerged, which is super cool. And so really big shout out to the Women in Robotics Mentorship Committee's members, Cynthia Young and Laura Steltzner and Andrew Kay, who have spearheaded this event and done so much work to get the whole program off the ground. We're super excited to welcome career roboticist Vivian Chu as the first interviewee in our series. Vivian is co-founder and CTO of Diligent Robotics and a longtime robotics expert who specializes in human-robot interaction. Vivian got her bachelor's in electrical engineering and computer science from UC Berkeley, a master's in robotics from the University of Pennsylvania, and her PhD in robotics at Georgia Tech, where she was co-advised by her co-founder, Dr. Andrea Tomaz, and along with Dr. Sonia Chernova. In addition to her role at Diligent, she's also worked at Google X, Honda Research Institute, and IBM Research. She's been featured on Robohub's 2016 list of 25 women in robotics that you need to know about, recognized by MIT Tech Review on its 35 Innovators Under 35 list, honored as a Google Anita Borg Memorial Scholar and as a Stanford EECS Rising Star, awarded the best paper in cognitive robotics at ICRA, and was included in the 2021 Fast Company Queer 50 list of top 10 women and non-binary innovators in business and tech. It's a totally all-star bio, but CVs kind of just focus on a capture of highlights, and career journeys are really rarely that linear. So in this series, we're going to be exploring the highs and lows and twists and turns that mark the inflection points, as Andrew likes to put it, in women's career journeys in this, what is really a highly gendered field. We're looking to uncover patterns in people's education, their leadership opportunities, technical experiences, cultural milieu, life events, mindset, and access to mentors, and how these lead to opportunities and career paths for women in robotics. So without further ado, welcome Vivian. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. That was a long intro. It was great. It's always weird hearing it come back at me. But yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So tell me, did you always know that you wanted to be a roboticist?
No, I definitely did not know. I always wanted to be a roboticist. Let's see. Growing up, I was like, maybe I'll be a police officer. Maybe I will be a basketball player in the WNBA. Like, I think I had all that dream went away when I realized I wasn't tall enough, probably from a height perspective.
Yeah.
But no, I think somewhere along the lines, I got the sense that I wanted to go in engineering because that's what my parents were doing and that's what they pushed me towards. I didn't discover robots until I got to college, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. So yeah.
So a bit later, did you ever envision yourself as leading a company one day? Like, was that even on the spectrum of possibilities for you?
This one is interesting because I grew up in Silicon Valley, which I think entrepreneurship, right? You hear about it, you see it. My own dad, like he traveled a lot to Asia trying to do his own thing. At one point also had his own company. I think so from that aspect of it, I actually did in the back of my mind always think about, hey, starting a company seems like something that's super interesting, super exciting. Didn't know how it would happen, but this sort of like in the back of my mind, like a possibility that got more and more solidified as I went to grad school and started to take even like entrepreneurship classes. So those are actually courses that I took just to get a taste of like, well, what does it actually mean to start something?
Yeah, what was it like growing up in a household where you had a parent as an entrepreneur? I did too. So I'm curious. I always feel like it gave me a different kind of window than a lot of other people.
Yeah, I think it was interesting for me because like I feel a little bad for my dad because I tell this story, but I wouldn't call him a successful entrepreneur. Like he's done a lot, built a lot, but at the end of the day, not necessarily what you consider success. And I really enjoyed like working with him and seeing sort of the ups and downs, but at the end, it's also a really good stark reminder that the likelihood of success is actually really, really low. And so it was, but at the same time, I saw the freedom and the joy that he got from like just doing his own thing. And I think that perspective probably gave me a little bit more of a window into, hey, it doesn't have to succeed. The chances are low, but actually, this is something though that's still worth doing. So it probably helped from that perspective.
Yeah, was there like an attitude around the failures? I'm recalling in my own experience some pretty low, tough times, especially during a recession period. And it's tough on a lot of businesses, and that left quite a deep impression on me. Do you recall sort of what that ride was like as a kid and feeling secure or insecure about those things?
I don't think so. I was really lucky that my mom held a very stable job. She was essentially like breadwinner. So I don't think there was ever a worry about stability. It was just more curiosity of sort of what he was doing. And it's just different. His day to day was always different. It wasn't like the same go in and go out. He would have different meetings um, uh, and different trips planned and things to make the business work. So I don't think it was that impactful other than just seeing a window into what it could be like.
Yeah, totally. I'm curious, did you have any leadership or training opportunities that might have set the stage for you for stepping into the kind of role you're in now when you were a kid? Thinking about sports teams, you'd said basketball earlier.
Yeah, I was never captain or anything of the basketball team. Let's see. I think the probably if I were to think back growing up from a leadership perspective, I did speech and debate actually in high school. And so I was on the debate team, and I'm like remembering all the details. It's like the policy debate team. You had a team of two. Started my started my first year in high school. Really enjoyed it, and so pretty much climbed the. I was like, it's really weird to sound it from climb the ranks, but basically worked really closely with the team such that my senior year essentially ended up being, I don't even remember the name of what it was called, but essentially like leading the debate team on the policy side. And that involved running meetings, organizing the training practices, teaching. I actually discovered that I really enjoyed teaching from at that point, where I remember teaching like ninth graders in high school about like, this is what policy is and these are the rules. And that was a new experience for me. So I would say that's probably the closest from a leadership perspective growing up that I got that.
It's interesting you mentioned like all the kind of work and organization that goes involved. Do you have any comments or thoughts around the idea of like leadership as being in charge and being visible versus getting in the weeds and just kind of like filling in the gaps? Where does it lie for you, do you think?
Huh. I don't know if I've thought about it too much. I think I definitely try to do the lead by example. It always makes me uncomfortable to not feel like I have done or have been in the trenches with folks that don't like, in particular, like I don't like asking someone to do something that I have not done or personally would do. So I think that from a leadership perspective is sort of how I see it. I'm still learning the other aspects of it, which are just there's the aspect where you just have to be a public face because that is how other people can just see like your story and learn from it and that aspect still makes me a little bit uncomfortable because I'm like I don't know like how much like how inspiring or anything it can be, but at the same time I know it's important to be there and do that. So yeah, I would say from like that aspect of it, much more comfortable with the doing it, working with side by side with people and leading in that capacity, less comfortable, but learning the importance of the driving the vision and being there just from like a public figure perspective.
Yeah, I totally get that. You were a child of the 80s and 90s. Do you remember any sort of big world events or technology developments that left a really big impression on you when you were growing up?
Hmm. Um, I don't know if there's any particular, I mean, I think I grew up through the Y2K. That was like the fun, like,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
like what happened? But I don't remember, like, I don't remember doing anything particular about it. Uh, Grew up in the like, oh, dial up, get off the phone because you need to like get on the internet and the phone call needs to come through. Um, yeah, maybe like, and then the dot-com bubbles where
Yeah.
like, right, all the companies like went under. Those are the ones that kind of I remember. I'm not sure if any of them had a particular impact on any of my like thought processes or yeah, but yeah.
You don't think any of those impacted your decisions around like what to study or what you thought might be an available career for yourself?
Nope, I don't
No.
think so.
Right, okay. You mentioned your parents as both being engineers. Uh, was there anybody else as a kid who played an influential role in your life growing up that you want to talk about?
Let's see. As a kid, um, hmm. So yeah, my parents being engineers definitely were hugely impactful. I know that I was really privileged from the aspect that they would have a computer at home because they would do work. And so I remember being able to be there when my dad was like reinstalling, I don't know, Windows 95, right? Like super old, but seeing that process, and it was really, really interesting, or watching him open up the computer to like change out the RAM and things like that. So that was a very large influence. I'm trying to think of other folks. I definitely had influence from, I would say like family friends. There was this one particular family friend that it was really interesting because I grew up in the Almaden Valley where there was a community actually, like one of my family friends, like mom, like the mom actually did this like after school program. And a
Mm.
bunch of us that were pretty much, I want to say, I wonder if it was like the Taiwanese community, but just a bunch of us like all around the same age group. It's like a after school babysitting, like mentoring, tutoring actually program. And I would get shuttled from there after school. And luckily then my parents have to worry about me or they could go do their work. And I would get shuttled there and have like packets of like homework that I would do to like help enrich school. So I would say that that had a huge obviously impact on getting through middle school and high school and just gave me a really big leg up that like to this day like I definitely credit like
Mhm.
that program and my friend's mom for like making a huge impact on where I am today.
You know, you saying get through that phase, and I know like adolescence. I've got I've got two kids. One's just on the other end, and one's coming up through. And I know adolescence can be a really big turning point for a lot of people, especially young women, for better or for worse. And technology is often so gendered and marketed explicitly of boys and not girls. And I'm wondering, what was your relationship or your idea of what um, technology can be to girls, and whether that was part of your mindset? Did those stereotypes impact the options and experiences you had at the time?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I think about this, I think it's I go back to how lucky I am with my parents. I think for them, there was always like a you can do whatever you want, right? You if you're interested in math and science, great, right? Like push me towards it. Like, oh, engineering is stable job, right? Go towards engineering. So my gender never played a role there. I mean, it was definitely clear in my classes that they were less women than men. But I would say actually it was interesting. I was really privileged in high school. I would say that the good chunk of my math and science friends that like we were all gunning for the same like colleges, taking the extra courses and like AP sciences and all that. I would say a lot of us were female. So it didn't really hit me until I think college is when I show up on like a classic story and are like 80 people, there's 3 women. I'm like, what? So yeah, like growing up, I think I was really lucky in that in my high school, that wasn't as big of a deal. It was actually funny. Often the women were the smartest in the class as opposed to the guys.
Sounds like you had a really nice peer group, but then you said it kind of dropped off at university. What was that about? Like, did people just spread out and go into different places? You wound up at Berkeley. Yeah. What made you?
Yeah, definitely. The group of us, we went to different places. I definitely had 1 or 2 friends that went to Berkeley. I think it's just in high school there was just less of us. Our class sizes were smaller, and so the ability to have a higher proportion might have come into play. But once you got to college, the class sizes are huge, and I don't know. Our school, like maybe my class in particular that year, was just like lucky in that we had more women. But when you think of the larger funnel, that wasn't the case.
Yeah. What made you decide to go to Berkeley?
Um, let's see. I think it was like a large part of it was location. My family is in San Jose, and it was just the right amount of distance where they couldn't visit me all the time. I couldn't live at home, but if I wanted to go home for like a meal or like anything, it was just like an hour drive away. So that had a huge impact. And then of course they had an amazing engineering program. I remember the classic, like everyone's checking, they're like, did you get in? Did you get in? And being like, yeah, I got in. And so it was just one of those like places where it was high on my list, having a great program, and then super close to home so I can stay close to family.
And so one thing I picked up in the, doing a bit of research on you before we started, you had an interest in developmental psychology at some point. I'm curious how that creeped into your education and how that influenced and shaped your work in robotics.
Yeah, let's see. I definitely took a psychology course in college, and it was really interesting just to like understand sort of the basics. Um, I would say probably the where things really picked up was in my master's program at Penn. They had this amazing series where pretty much every week or every other week in the grasp lab, it would be like pizza, right? They would provide free pizza. So every grad student would have motivation to show up, and they would invite speakers from universities. And I remember like distinctly, there was like one talk about how this one professor went and like watched his own son grow up, right? And like reading all the psychology papers and showing like how you can transfer that to sort of robot learning, have the robot explore the world just like a child does, and just being super fascinated by that. And that was very early on in the master's program. And I saw that talk and I was like, that's it. Like that's the research I want to do. And pretty much from then on sort of like focused a lot of the master's work, my like first real research paper in that area, where it's like, okay, I want the robot to explore. I want to see a robot learn and build out that skill set. So yeah, but I don't know if I went and did much more work in development psychology, like just reading a few, kind of getting that inspiration, and then looking at what the other researchers in the field have also kind of done with that space of like, it's like intrinsic motivation, I think is like the technical term of like of a lot of people who've done sort of the algorithmic research on that side and started to apply it to my own work.
So I don't know if the paper you mentioned earlier was the paper on object affordances that got you the best paper award at ICRA.
Yeah, that was the paper that my first real serious robotics submission. Yep.
Nice. Yeah. So for people who, because I'm not sure exactly the age range and background of people who are going to be watching this, but for people who don't know, what do roboticists mean when they talk about affordances?
Yeah, let's see. So essentially, forgive me, it's been a while since I've talked about this. Like I'm in like diligent world, and so I'm like, okay, what did I do for that paper? What does affordances mean again? No. So really the goal was to teach So affordances, you have things like, it's the interplay between object, action, and an agent. So I, as an agent, interacting with like a bottle, and if I push it over, like the action of pushing and the bottle tips means that bottle has the affordance of tippable. And so if you think about an agent interacting in the world in the same way like a robot is an agent that interacts with the world and has its own sort of physical ability to use its motors, how that robot interacts with those objects, you can start to piece together how it could learn about the world and do things in the world. So if you know about how to do a rollable affordance or a pickable affordance or pourable, you can start to sequence those together into like, go water the plants. So you want to find something that has a containing affordance. You want to find something that has a pouring affordance. And so the robot can use these building blocks to then do things in the world. So that was sort of the high level motivation, was to be able to, at the end of the day, get the robot to do something useful. And then how? Well, one theory and one model was to break down the world into affordances. And then if you break it down into those affordances, you can pick a small teeny one like tippable and start to have a hope to teach a robot that one skill set. And if you teach enough, maybe the robot will become useful. So that's sort of the notion of affordances on the robotics side, that at least the last time I read in the literature that I worked on.
So you called out your UPenn master's advisor, Dr. Catherine Kuchenbecker, in particular, in one of the interviews I read, that she took a chance on a no-name graduate student. I think about this as kind of an affordance of a different kind. What chance did she actually take on you? What did you feel at the time? Like, was this the right thing for her to do? And how did it shape your idea of like the action of possibilities that were available to you at the time?
That's an interesting way to think about affordances. Yeah. So yeah, when I went to Penn, I would say that like I was just like any other master student, right? There's a ton of us. You get split out into, do you want to do a thesis? Do you want to just take coursework? And so there's no particular reason to pick out a particular master student from the group. I say that she took a chance on me is that she had a DARPA grant to be able to teach robots about language. In particular, we were focused on, we eventually settled on teaching the robot things like haptic adjectives. And so this was a 5-year-long DARPA grant. She had a PhD student that sort of initially picked it up, but didn't, but graduated. And so really something as big as a DARPA grant, you want to say like, here, PhD student, own it, right? You're in my like lab. I have confidence that you can go do it. And when the DARPA like demo in a year from now that we have to just like present, I'm not worried that it's going to not work. And so I remember when she was talking about all the projects that I could work on in her lab, I was like, I want that one, right? That one seems cool. And she was like, okay, like, and I don't know what made her say like, go for it. At the end of the day, it never needed to pull in a PhD student. It ended up with a couple of master's students and a bunch of undergrads, and like this, like it was like a 9-author paper. It was a huge endeavor. But it was so much fun. And I remember being like there, like we had to actually fly into Berkeley. It was great. It was a collaboration with Berkeley and Penn to do that final DARPA demo. And I remember like with Catherine there sitting as we watched it work. It was a great moment. And yeah, it's one that I don't know what made her decide like, hey, okay, I'll give it to Vivian and give her a shot at it. So.
That's awesome. It looks to me like your whole university career was filled with so many incredible women mentors. Is there anyone else that you would like to call out?
I mean, there's just so many. So obviously, Catherine was a big one. When I was previous to going to Penn, I was at IBM, and I think that was a really big moment for me. There were lots of mentors there, so both women and men that helped get me basically gave me the confidence. Like I had no idea I wanted to pursue a PhD. They're like, oh, you could do a PhD. I'm like, really? Like a PhD? Isn't that for someone who's like super smart and like, you know, like that's not me, right? Like, why would I go do that? So that like, yeah, I can't, there's so many names, but essentially that my whole team at IBM on the informatics, database informatics team there were super inspirational, taught me the basics of like machine learning that I never learned even in college. So that was a set of really important people. Obviously going forward, my PhD career at Georgia Tech, both my advisors, fantastic, amazing women, right? Sonia and Andrea, hugely shaping the landscape of the work in general in the field, and I get to be as part of that. It's just been fantastic. I think it's really interesting that I've gotten lucky that I've not had to deal with more toxic environments where you have like maybe a male dominated lab that you have to continue to prove yourself. That was never an issue by being in these labs because they naturally pulled in people of more diverse backgrounds and just more women. And so that wasn't something that I just ever had to deal with. So I've been super lucky from that perspective. So yeah, but those are some other key female mentors in my life, in my career.
And so you did your undergrad in electrical and computer science, and then you shifted into robotics. So what made you say, robotics, that's what I want?
Yeah. So that was definitely in college. When I got there, it was actually funny. My parents were like, don't do computer science, do electrical engineering. It's a better career path, like more money. Like, I don't know. There was something along that lines that they were telling me. And so I remember took my first EE class. I hated it. It was like microelectronics. I did so poorly. Like I was like, I don't like computing the like circuits and resistors and fine. Like the labs are kind of interesting, but it was awful. And then even in my computer science classes, I remember like it was interesting to kind of see the logic being able to build out and see things happen, but it still just happens on the screen. And so for me, there was a aha moment when I took my first intro to robotics course. And this one was taught by Regina Baichi, who actually I forgot to mention, huge piece of the puzzle in terms of like amazing female roboticists, like literally a pioneer in the space. I took her class. And in one part of the class, you got like this Roomba, like the Roomba I Create, that like is the educational platform that you kind of learn on. And when we had to program, they had an IMU on a very like a simple board that was mounted onto this robot, and all we had to do is like make the robot climb a ramp based off of the IMU readings, right? Really simple, just like move towards the highest elevation. But I think that was the moment where that was a big moment for me, because it was the first time I physically saw how the things that I was doing had a physical reaction in the world, right? I actually got to see the robot bouncing around, right, climbing hills and ramps, and at that point it was interesting because also the first time where I was like, I'm in the lab, it's been 12 hours and I haven't noticed it. And I think that was a moment where I was like, this is super interesting. And it was already on like my junior year of college, and I was like, oh no, it's like almost too late, I have no time left. So I took as many classes as I could in the robotics space after that. But yeah, and then that's sort of like the direction. I'm like, okay, I want to go towards robotics. I always stayed on the computer science side of the robotics, but still focusing on always having that hardware component as opposed to like just databases or OSs. Those classes were not fun for me.
No. And what was it like? Did you ever find a division? I hear this from time to time, the division of labor on the hardware versus software side of things. Did you notice anything around like who was gravitating towards hardware versus software side of things? And
Might have to rephrase the question. So like in terms of my own interest or in terms of,
yeah, just in terms of the types of people and backgrounds of the people who were going into choosing one or the other.
Oh, I don't know if I've paid it much attention to hardware and whether or not in software and that line, yeah. So I don't, I'm maybe not very observant from that perspective.
Okay, so you graduated. What was your first like real world job in robotics, and how did you get it?
Let's see, my first real world job. So that was so in between my master's and my PhD, I remember there was an internship, like basically I wanted to look for an internship. I don't even remember how I got connected to the job posting, but Honda Research was looking for a position, like looking for interns there. Um, I honestly can't say I remember much about it other than I wanted to give it a try. I wanted to see what it was like. It was close to home because it was in Mountain View. And it was interesting because they were experimenting with like human interfaces in terms of like driving and how to better maintain concentration and things like that. So it was just a fun sort of like foray into it. So yeah.
So I'd love to talk more about Diligent. Um, who or what inspired you to take that leap and actually start your own business?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, starting in my master's as well as going into my PhD, there was always this like sense of like, well, maybe I want to start a company, right? I like this, like, so in my master's, I took the engineering entrepreneurship classes, learned about that whole process. And then in my PhD, I actually did a minor in business. It sounds more impressive than it is. It just means I took 3 classes in business and ta-da, you get a minor. So I took like the basic accounting and marketing classes, sort of like business 101. So it was always sort of in the back of my mind from that perspective. It was around like basically because Andrew is my co-founder. Andrew is also my PhD advisor. It's fantastic, and we would have these conversations about career, like what do I want to do? Do I want to go to a postdoc and go down academia? But then really, if I go down academia, I also want to do this startup thing, and like they're both really similar, and sort of what does that look like? And I think in part of that discussion, it also kind of sparked her interest. She was like, well, I'm tenured now. What do I do with my life? Right? Like, what's my next big thing? And so in all of that, there was a moment where we got an interesting opportunity through NSF ICOR program, which is all about how do you get academics out of lab? How do you get research, fundamental research out of the lab into business to be able to support sort of jobs and growth? And so that's when there was initial, while I was still in my PhD, exploration on understanding where the technology that we've been building in that lab could be applied to business. So that's sort of like the inklings of where Diligent Robotics got started, was really through this NSF ICOR program. The program was a short program. Andrew was actually the main participant. I wasn't even part of that program when it went off. I think she even had a whole different PhD student sort of exploring that with her. I was still like only a third year. And then right before I was about to propose for my thesis, Andrew decided like, hey, let's actually like see if we can take this on as a real thing. This was interesting enough. I think I'm interested enough. And we we worked on a SBIR grant. And so that was probably the biggest stepping stone for Diligent, where we applied to that grant. The money came in. And so Andrew's like, we have money. Do you want to like go and do this? And so at that point, I actually took a six-month break from the PhD. And at that point, Andrea actually had just moved to UT Austin. She switched universities. And so finished proposing, went and said, let's do this. And I think it was from that moment where we're like, let's see in 6 months, can we find a market? Can we see if there's interest? And we spent that time really shadowing nurses. We went to so many hospitals, spending time following the staff around to say like, is there a need? Is there something we can do to make a big impact and difference? Andrew and I really, really believe in having the, like, not creating something for the sake of it, right? We wanted to make sure that whatever we built was truly wanted and needed. And so that meant we really took that users focused design, which we are really, really good at as being human robot researchers, um, and use that to do that initial discovery. And what we saw was just eye-opening, right? All the things that you see in the research papers, right? The time that they spend running around, the time that they are looking for things that they that aren't there, the time spent just running down to lab to go get something. It was all true, and we got to like see it firsthand. And so that was really the big inspiration of like, okay, there's a problem. The technology is ready to tackle it. No one else is doing it, right? As I was getting ready to think about graduation, there wasn't even anyone else that was doing this robotics work. It was all warehouses. And so then we were like, we decided like, well, let's take the plunge. And so I remember talking to Andrea about it, and we are like, well, we can kind of treat it like a 2-year postdoc, right? If it doesn't work out, right? Like, and so that's how it went.
I love this experimental mindset where you're just like, okay, we'll give it 6 months and see what happens. Okay, we'll give it 2 years and see what happens. That's pretty awesome. Did you know ahead of time, like before you decided to start a company, did you know you wanted to do it in the healthcare space, or were you already thinking of the healthcare space and then thought, no, there's a business opportunity here? Like which came first? Because you were saying, a lot of people, they want to solve, they have a technology, and we should be developing ones that actually solve real problems. So what was the order of operations there?
Yeah. So this is where, like I mentioned, the ICRA program, that's where I think like Andrea and the other PhD student, almost 100 different conversations. Like, and that's when we like looked across the spectrum of, well, where is the technology fit? What sort of possible industries and verticals? And so in that whole discovery process, that's where healthcare fell out. And so then when we wrote the SBIR grant, we said, well, okay, we think it's healthcare, and we validated it through a lot of shadowing in that 6-month period. So yeah, that's how we kind of landed on healthcare, is that when we really, really started the company in 2018, we had, and that's what we pitched. We wanted to tackle it. We wanted to go into hospitals and tackle it from there.
Nice. I thought it was really interesting, given your interest in human robot interaction, that your robot Moxie isn't really designed to interact with patients so much as it's designed to run background tasks, like delivering supplies and stuff. How did you come to focus on that end of the task spectrum for Moxie?
Yeah, I think this one, Andrew and I firmly believe that robots need to be useful first. And then the aspects that we cared about, not that there aren't other important aspects, the aspects that we really cared about was how to make the robots then that are useful be integrated well into a team environment. And those aspects of the human robot interaction are absolutely crucial in order to be adopted, to be used, to work seamlessly in your environment. So we didn't want to build a robot that all it did was social interactions. We really wanted a robot that would go and do something physically useful. And on top of that, then in order for that to be really successful, that was our thesis going into Diligent, is that you had to include the human robot aspects of it, or else you're never going to truly get full adoption of your platform.
So I was amazed at how quickly some of the the attitude shifts kind of turned around. Could you tell us a bit about the experience of what people thought it was going to be like onboarding a robot in a hospital environment, and the nurse's experience, and then what it turned out to look like after?
Yeah, so whenever we show up to a hospital with the robot, you always get very like varying attitude, like level of surprises, I would say, is the first thing. You definitely immediately get the like, hey, a robot's here, it's gonna take my job. But as soon as we say, nope, the robot literally won't cross the patient bedroom line, like that's where you go, and the robot's in the back, immediately attitude shift. They're like, oh, I get it. So you mean I don't have to run over there anymore? And I'm like, exactly. So there's that aspect of it, just like automation and being very clear like what it is that the robot's doing for the team. The other aspect is always fun is that human robot interaction aspect of Moxie, is that people end up starting to, I mean, you make connections with all sorts of technology, but because Moxie's just so adorable, we have an amazing industrial designer, people start having full-on conversations. They'll say, "Good morning, Moxie." Like Moxie doesn't necessarily respond, doesn't have like necessarily does dialogue, but they really do embrace the robot as part of the team over time because of the other aspects that we've developed, as well as it actually being useful. So they see it as a useful member of their team.
Yeah, so the task comes first because that's how you build the trust. Do you think we're ever going to have robots that are capable of providing like the care or emotional labor that nurses are so often tasked with, and would that even be a good thing?
Yeah, I this is where it's like it's the question of would it even be a good thing? I think for us, this is why we often say we draw the line at the patient door, because really we want to encourage people to interact with other people. I could definitely see long term a day where in general the technology is ready for that, but I'm not sure if that's something that we are interested in doing as much, because like I said, we want the aspects of the care to be done by the people.
So I read in, I think it was the PC Mag interview, that you picked the name Moxie because you were looking for a name that was short and easy to say and not human and gender free. Why was having a non-gendered robot so important to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, it was really important because often it already happens in healthcare, whereas we didn't want to, or already, right? Like doctors are typically male, nurses are typically female, and people make those associations even though they're not necessarily true at all. And we wanted to make sure we didn't fall into a similar trap where we're trying to get the robot to take on the lowest levels of work. And if we didn't want to then gender the fact the robot was taking the lowest level work might be female or male, right? We just wanted to make it very clear that this is a robot. We tell people that they can call the robot he or she whatever they want. We try our best to just say Moxie or the robot, to be able to emphasize that.
Nice. So it's interesting you talk about the roles in hospitals. The robotics industry also it has its it's been called out for its lack of gender diversity. And they often say, well, it's hard to hire because there aren't that many people in the space who come from diverse backgrounds. But your team at Diligent looks pretty diverse. And was it actually a challenge to find diverse candidates?
It is a challenge every day when it comes to hiring to maintain that diversity. For us, it's being very careful about following all the best practices to make sure that you're always looking for a candidate pool that is diverse, because it's so easy to take the easy, like it's super easy to be like, well, so and so's friend I trust, joink, right? And you don't do that full process. So pretty much every single hire it's a challenge, like across the board. It's always a challenge, and we always have to make ourselves be like, okay, it's good for the business to take our time and do it correctly, but it's painful because it takes 2 to 3 times as long to fill that role to make sure we're doing it correctly.
So what are some of these best practices, or the ones that you find are working for you?
Yeah, I think the big thing is to make sure that you are advertising the job in a wide variety of places, so it does make its way out into the community, and making sure to target the candidate pools that you just don't have as many candidates from. So that's like just making sure that your pipeline coming in, and that active search is happening. Having an actual process, making sure that you're not having just sort of like your team interview and say, they like me, I like them, we're going to hire them. Like actually saying like, these are the steps, right? Very clearly making it such that everyone goes through those steps. And then those are sort of the big ones. And then trying our best. We haven't been as successful, but really trying our best, like the Rooney rule, right? Like making sure that for every position, you really do have a candidate that has a diverse background in that pool of final selection, so that you at least have that ability to make sure you have someone in there. That means you haven't done enough work to get that candidate pool. So.
Interestingly, I just today reading that actually it's not enough to have one, you got to have two, because otherwise like at least two, because otherwise that one person's like put on the spot. You're hiring right now. What are you looking for in a new recruit?
Yeah, we're hiring across the board. A lot of folks on the just like pure software side. In general, for a robotics company of like ours, is we have a hardware team, and then we have an exponentially larger software team to be able to make the robot do everything it needs to do. So just hiring a back-end engineers, hiring more of these support roles like DevOps, test, things that as we grow, we need to make sure that the system is super robust and reliable. Also, just on the robotic software side, people who have the intuitions of what is not and is feasible, right? To be able to tell the other engineers, like, you know, that thing that you think is easy? No, like that's a whole research problem, right? That's a whole thesis that you just proposed to do in that story. So that aspect of the robotic software engineer is another role that we are hiring for, is to bring that expertise to the team. In particular, really focused on folks with navigation. Our SLAM background is one of the key highlights, but in general, we are hiring across the board on the robotic software side.
Nice. Okay, I have a couple of lightning questions for you. So like short answers, and then we'll move to some Q&A from the audience, because I know there's people who would love to talk. Okay, what was your first robot?
Like as in like at home, or?
The first one that you got your hands on.
It probably was the iRoomba Create in my college class, yeah.
Okay, what organizations outside your own do you know the most people at, and why?
Outside. I mean, I guess at this point, maybe sort of my grad school labs, like, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. Okay, what are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? It was the last book. It's a lot of reading, sort of, I think it was like the first 100 days of an exec, I think was the last book I was reading. There's a lot of books as a startup founder that you just have to be like, how do I do this? Let me find a book that tells me how to do this. So that was the last book that I read or reading right now.
Totally. Okay, who do you go to first when you need a sanity check?
Probably the first person would be my wife. It's sort of like she has a lot of experience in startup land as well, and in general, and I'm like, and usually she'll tell me something that I don't want to hear, and I'm like, okay, but then eventually, like, I was like, okay, this is good that I talked through this. So yeah.
Nice. Well, I wanted to thank everybody, Vivian, you especially, for just taking the time and just sharing some of your personal background too, in terms of how you got to where you are today. And also Cynthia and Laura and Andrea for organizing the event. And thanks so much for everybody who came today. Really appreciate your time. And thanks again so much, Vivian.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's great.
All right. Cheers, everyone.
Bye.